Every story you love, every invention that moves you, every idea you wished was yours, all began as nothing. Just a blank page with a blinking cursor, asking a simple question. What do you see? Great ideas start on Mac. Find out more on apple.com/Mac.
The detective said missing kids usually come home. What happens when they don't?
Based on a true story.
Police looking for John Gacy.
We discovered bodies. By the looks of it, they're younger men.
The things he did to those kids. He's sick.
The system failed these families.
Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Do you know how many there are?
Up to you to find out.
Welcome to Why We Roll, a tabletop role-playing game design podcast by the Stillfleet Studio. We're your hosts, Chris Pickett, creator of the historical fantasy game Dance Macabre, and Wythe Marshall, creator of the political sci-fi game Stillfleet. Through the show, we hope to amplify new creative voices. We chat with different indie TTRPG designers, talking through a range of questions that are pertinent to many designers, players, and GMs. We hope to showcase fresh and even challenging ideas about what makes imagination-based games so powerful. Before we introduce today's guest, a reminder. If you enjoy this episode, please consider supporting the show and all of our games over at patreon.com/Stillfleet. Okay, let's find out why we roll. Welcome. It's Why We Roll, the tabletop game design podcast from the Stillfleet Studio. I'm Wythe Marshall, and Chris?
That's me. I'm Chris Pickett.
Hey, what's up, Chris? How you doing?
I'm doing great, Wythe. How are you on this late night recording?
Yeah, it's 8 p.m. instead of 7 p.m., and it's Tuesday instead of Monday. So it's a Freaky Friday situation, but on a Tuesday. But we're very happy to make an extra slot here for Daniel Kwan, who's a game designer. I've read some of his work, I admire. And saw that Wandering Blades, a game I'd heard about, I think from Plus One XP, is finally coming out. So, Daniel, thanks for making time to tell us about your game design, in general, and, just learn more.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Before we got started, we were talking about hit points. So,
hit points and how I apparently hate them.
Apparently.
So, Daniel, why are you diametrically opposed to hit points?
or so a small corner of TTRPG Twitter, X, or what I refuse to call it X. Twitter seems to think. No, there was I was on this panel a couple of years ago that WotC hosted about kids in gaming and like introducing kids to tabletop gaming. And I made a comment on the panel about how, I used to run games for kids and how sometimes, don't track HP on, are a big bad because I want to make sure that people get their moment. I want to make sure that the character who has built up their entire story for our program, to built up their backstory and their goal was to land a killing blow gets their moment. And this got taken out of context on Twitter, and I got flamed. And I mean, like for days, people would be like, "Oh my God, this guy is the worst. Why does Wizards have him on their stream? He doesn't track HP. He doesn't follow the rules. This is wrong. This is not real gaming." And oh my God. And now it's kind of just been a running joke amongst my friends that like, "Oh, Daniel's the guy who doesn't track HP." But
you heard it. You heard it here, folks. Daniel Kwan hates HP mechanics and which is not true at all. I was reading through the quick start for Wandering Blades earlier today, and you use hit points, you use hit die. It's all there. It's not like
it's all there.
Yeah. Decontextualized comments. That's rough.
Yeah, it happens though. It happens, and I think that when you get haters online, it means you must be doing something right.
Do we have any haters, Wythe? I hope not.
I mean, I don't know if we're successful enough. I think that's to me also a mark of the sort of churn of the market. Is that if you do anything, if you produce a signal. I mean, that's why I listen to a lot of the Dirtbag Left podcasts, and they're always pointing out one of the sort of it's not just Chapo, it's also like, Minion Death Cult, et cetera, that all these Republican guys used to be Democrats, right? Like all the Trump people now were Democrats and they all sort of are always selling some version of, pills that make you live longer that are made from horse urine or something. And it's like this very reversible, flexible, just, they really do this kind of misreading of Derrida, like anything can be anything. But I think that's a sign of just how the internet functions today too, is that people talk about brain rot and whatnot. But one of the reasons I think, to turn it back to games, that physical games are so great is because they are moments for people to really meet each other in a more authentic way. Funny enough, through pretend, through maybe opening themselves up to play. And with kids, so it's fun to hear about like, oh yeah, so kids want to have a big epic moment. I think everyone does. And I think, we have HP, but I would say, a lot of us don't really track it that well. Like, it kind of depends on the fight, but sometimes it's like, yeah, you killed that thing. Good job. Because, you're doing it behind the GM screen, even if, I'm putting
exactly. It's like you're setting up this epic moment. Like everybody in the party is cooperating to help give, this one character the big epic smite, and they roll, and oh no, there's 1 HP left. What are you going to be like? Nope, you don't kill him.
Yeah, that sucks.
Like, come on.
That sucks.
Legendary resistance.
That sucks for everybody at the table.
That's not fun. It makes the combat draw out longer. It takes away the preciousness of that moment, of that narrative moment, and like I'm personally a big proponent of the kind of like OSR thinking around like, you should interact with the fiction, like, rule of cool, all that stuff. If you land a big hit and there's 1 HP left, just scrub that HP off. It doesn't matter.
I think that's the entire OSR. It's like, oh, you don't like that rule? Don't use it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Or you like this rule from this game? Bring it into this other game.
Yeah.
You say like that, but I also
bring it into this one.
I feel like a lot of OSR people would be like, no, live and die by the rules. Like the rules, play a grindcore death, like what's it, high lethality game where.
But I don't think that's the rule. I think that's the experience. Because I think in the OSR, like rulings over rules is so big.
Yeah, that is a big tenet. Yeah. But also, I mean, the OSR, whatever that is in reality, I'm reminded of the meme where the guy's looking at the butterfly and he's like, is this the OSR? Yeah. But it's not a monolith, right? There's different camps within that. Some people are going to be more grognardy and want to be real crunchy. Other people are going to go for the narrative kind of experience and interacting with the fiction, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. There's a matter of lexical interpretation with the original game, the OSR version, and then now, hopefully, maybe this is a question, Daniel. Do you see yourself as part of, the NSR or something new that's blossomed out of, or is it all just OSR, or is it all just classic having fun?
I feel like this would be my new HP.
Oh no! Yes, you heard it.
I feel like this will be my new HP flame. No, I am a big fan of the OSR. I've been a fan of OSR products and that sort of like experience since not as long as I think most people, since 2018. I picked up my first OSR product in 2018. It was like at Gen Con. I got the early versions of Mothership, and that kind of got me into it. Like the aesthetic, the vibe, the design of Mothership is incredible. I mean, I would consider myself just like a game designer who appreciates like the OSR, who appreciates like story games. I definitely think that my own sort of design sensibilities tend to kind of sit kind of in the middle. Mm-hmm. Like there's certainly like NSR parts of my design. There's definitely OSR, but then there's also like story game, and then there's some trad. Like my favorite tabletop RPG is D&D 3.5.
Hell yeah.
Really? Okay.
But that's not for everyone, but it's just the one I have the most nostalgia for. Yeah. It's the one that I played a lot when I was younger.
Sure. That's my nostalgia game as well, is like 3 into 3.5, a little bit of the like, first inklings of Pathfinder, but that's the sweet spot for me where I mean that's how I got into tabletop games in general.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. It's definitely got like a high barrier to entry, but once you're in there, it's just going through the motions. It's like, oh, I know what to do. I know what to math. I like the build craft of 3.5. They're like, okay, well, if I start at this, then I have to take this many levels in this, then I could prestige class into this. And it's not for everyone though.
But you've got your equations.
Yeah. It's like I see all of the variables floating around in front of me.
Again, the meme of just, math equations floating around Daniel Kwan's head. Okay, well, speaking of early, how we got into tabletop role playing games, let's contextualize Daniel Kwan. Daniel, who are you? What are you working on? For folks that don't know, for folks that don't follow your work, what do you got going on?
Yeah, my name's Daniel. I am a game designer, podcaster, cultural consultant based in Canada. I've worked on over 40 tabletop games as like a freelancer or as a creator. I got my start playing tabletop RPGs over 2 decades ago, playing 3.0 at like a museum. Actually, I learned how to play D&D at a museum here in Toronto.
Pretty cool. That feels very unique.
Yeah.
Actually, I feel like
it was super cool. Yeah. It was really funny. Actually, that at the time of this recording, I actually went back to that museum to do a talk about game design.
Nice.
For kids. Yeah. So I live in Toronto, and there's a museum here called the Royal Ontario Museum. It's actually Canada's largest natural history and cultural history museum, like combined. It's one of the biggest museums in the country. And when I was like a young kid, my mom signed my brother and I up for a Dungeons and Dragons summer camp there, and not knowing what D&D was. And the experience is exactly what you might have dreamed it to be. It was literally like the teacher, the instructor was like a local comic book artist, and we would do lessons in the galleries, and then we would play D&D in the galleries, like literally sitting on the floor in the gallery. We got our minis, our dice, our character sheets, and we're surrounded by like dinosaur fossils.
That's sick as hell. That's so
we had
cool.
like a really cool classroom that was hidden behind this like fake wall, and it had like cabinets with suits of armor in it. It was the dopest childhood experience. That got me into tabletop RPGs and like Warhammer too. And learning to play in the museum kind of got me hooked on that sort of industry. I ended up actually getting my first summer job working at the museum doing D&D. My first summer job as a teenager was playing Dungeons and Dragons at a museum.
Oh my God, what a what a flex!
That's a great,
yeah, it's a great job. And this was before the whole pro
hell.
GMing thing. This was before pro GMing was even a thing. And went to school. I got a degree, and then when I was in grad school, I needed to work because universities don't pay you when you're in grad school.
Yeah.
And so I got a job teaching at the museum. And so I took over the Dungeons and Dragons program.
Amazing.
So I had a lab in the museum, and then I would go and I would teach kids programs on like the weekends, the holidays, and the summers. And I think I must have taught like 1,000 kids how to play D&D. And I did that for years, almost a decade. And so I got my start in game design kind of by accident. This was like in 2017. I wanted to teach World War One, like do a lesson on World War One, because Remembrance Day here in Canada fell on a Saturday, and I was teaching a class, and so I wanted to actually have all of my volunteers and my staff run a collective World War One tabletop game, and where we would all be in different like squads, and we would have this cool shared narrative around a big battle that would be the focus of our lesson for the day. And I couldn't find a game that wasn't supernatural. There are so many World War One games that are just all about the supernatural, that the whole weird War One thing. And so I was like, you know what we should do? Let's just make our own game. So me and two of my staff members, we designed a bare bones World War One game called Ross Rifles, and it became my first game. And so after all this time, I went back to the museum and I did a talk for a bunch of school groups on game design and representation and why it matters.
Oh, that's incredible!
That's awesome. Can you tell us anything about that game? Do you remember? Like, did you play it? Was it fun?
It is available.
It was a real game.
It's available.
Yeah,
on
it became a real game
now, right?
Yeah, so we ended up designing a couple little games, and then we kickstarted it just before the pandemic. We published it, and it is apparently very popular in Germany.
Interesting.
But yeah, we made it. We turned it into a real book. It's like 1/3 of it is like a textbook about like the Canadian experience, about the weapons of the war. It helped that like the designers all worked in a museum and had access to things like that. And I think it's all culminated in Ross Rifles actually being included in a special exhibition at the Canadian War Museum on the intersection of warfare and gaming, and they had a big display with Ross rifles.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, the history of gaming, especially war games and then into TTRPGs, you can trace it right back.
There's a direct lineage.
You trace it right on back to the Prussian military, baby.
Yes, 100%.
Straight line.
And economic sims, it turns out, like left libertarian early computer scientists. It's the whole thing is really wacky, but that's so cool, Daniel, that you were able to like work at the museum and then make a game kind of relate, and then have it featured in a probably different museum, but still museum. Like, have that kind of through line to your craft. So it's interesting how sometimes these themes are more diffuse and sometimes they're like, no, museums are great. I mean, I know you've done other things, but to provide that kind of foundation. So that's really cool. Maybe can you tell us a little more about so going from Ross rifles, like, what next in terms of game design and what leads you to, what we're going to, spoiler, we're going to be talking about Wandering Blades and the campaign.
Yeah. Well, as I was working on Ross rifles, at the same time, I started a podcast like so many people do.
What?
Yeah, I know, right? Started a podcast with a friend of mine named Agatha, and it was called Asians Represent. And we're still making the show like 6 years later.
Oh yeah.
And so started, this podcast about Asian representation in like tabletop games. Decided that we would interview other game designers and stuff like that, and it kind of helped create this like brand for us. And this led to like opportunities. And when you work in tabletop games, it's very decentralized, and a lot of the work that you get is through word of mouth, especially as a freelancer. And so, one opportunity led to another, and then COVID happened. And then, we started streaming. We had the brilliant idea of reading Oriental Adventures cover to cover live.
Oh, ouch.
And that, in hindsight, maybe wasn't like the greatest idea. It caused we got a lot of hate for it. But it started a conversation about like what good representation looked like in the industry. Yeah. And at the same time, I had an opportunity just before the pandemic to start working on Candlekeep Mysteries with Wizards of the Coast, which then turned into like a ton of other opportunities afterwards. And it's just kind of been this sort of like wild ride.
Yeah. Can I ask who gave you flack for reading through that? And I'm assuming, reading it with a critical lens and.
Yeah, we were reading it with the critical lens and reacting to it live. A lot of the people who you would expect to give us flack for that. Without saying anything. A lot of the people who's just still on Twitter, I guess. But we got a lot of flack for that. We got a lot of flack for like speaking up. And, I think when you love something and you hear people call it out, you naturally get defensive.
Yeah, it seems that people do for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, it makes sense to do something like that if you're going to read through it. And I admit I've not watched and listened to all of that, but
there's like 80 hours.
Yeah, I was going to say like you're going to find faults obviously, but you're also going to find probably some touch points or things of interest, right? It's not just you don't do that much work out of pure hate if you're like a sane person, right? You're doing it out of a kind of like, okay, what would I do different? Like there's something generative or interesting. Yeah. There's a grit that makes the pearl there, right? And I think that's one of the hard things with design versus like fandom is like when you're making stuff, you're always kind of like taking apart. Even if you really like the last thing you did, you're like, I could do better. Much less something maybe 40 years ago that was not good. So it's kind of, but I'd be interested. I'm really interested actually, if there's anything you could, if not to summarize 80 hours, but is there maybe one story that stands out or one kind of moment in your reflection? Cause I had that book growing up and it was just it was at the friendly local game store and it was like, oh,
I have both versions. I have both versions of it. I don't think there's anything particularly redeeming about it.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I mean, it's the kind of, I'll give them credit. It was made in the day and age when there wasn't really the internet, and it was cobbled together using whatever resources they had, and a lot of people didn't have a lot Asian representation in media and scholarship wasn't really a huge thing in the West, and so it is a product of its time. I personally don't fault anybody for like enjoying it or owning it. I mean, I own it, but that doesn't mean that it can't be criticized. I mean, there's literally a town in the setting called Tsingtao that makes beer.
Ooh.
And yeah, like chopsticks are listed in the weapons section.
Oh my god. I will push back about the not being made during the internet. So 3rd edition Oriental Adventures came out in 2001. So
Yes,
it's kind of like,
yeah, that one is not as bad, but it still leans in heavily on what the consumers were wanting at the time.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of legacy products that just because they're old doesn't mean they're necessarily bad, right? I think one thing that we actually reviewed on the podcast recently was Grand Cathay. Are you folks like Warhammer enthusiasts?
I am in a past life, I was a big Warhammer person, but I will publicly state that I deeply dislike Games Workshop and how they've been pushing fascism for the last 30 years. But
that's totally fair. That's totally fair. And I think interesting thing about like Warhammer, and I'm talking about Warhammer Fantasy. Warhammer 40K is its own beast. I think personally, I think that Games Workshop has done a really good job of being upfront about like, we don't want Nazis in our hobby. You're not welcome here. Warhammer 40K is supposed to be satire. But that said, I totally understand your perspective. But they have a fantasy setting from their game Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and they have their own Chinese faction called Grand Cathay. And so recently we were like, you know what? We're going to like read all the material about them. There's an army that's coming out. It was just announced at Adepticon. It's going to come out later this year. Let's actually give it a shot. And we read it and we were like, this is actually pretty good. It was like they were first mentioned in like the 80s around the same time as Oriental Adventures. And we were like, this isn't particularly inventive, but it's also not particularly offensive at the same time. It's like pretty solid. We had a guest on the podcast who works in like video game localization for like Chinese. And he said that the way they had named characters and the actual Chinese characters that they used were like showed a deep commitment to capturing like a Chinese audience. And I thought that was really cool.
All right.
So my point is that like not all like old settings are awful.
Right.
But I think there's a certain level of care that should go into reviving them.
Yeah.
So,
And just to clarify, like my earlier question was not like what's out of 80 hours of like tearing through Oriental Adventures, what was something good? It was more just like what are some takeaways, what are some lessons? But it's interesting.
Yeah, I think that those are
Grand Cathay, where like, okay, try to think about if there's an audience you're representing, how to actually engage with that audience seems pretty basic, but they were, like you said, around the same time. They were two big companies. One did it, one didn't do it. Yeah. So that's like kind of natural, experiment in a way.
Yeah, and Grand Cathay, when they were first revealed, and folks will point this out, they were always in like little footnotes. There were always little sections. They didn't have their own dedicated book like Oriental Adventures did, but they did have a video game in 2022, Total War Warhammer 3, where they were like a core faction.
Yeah, I think
it's very well done.
Vex in the chat did say that their hero in that game is pretty sick.
Yeah, the Storm Dragon, super cool. But yeah, there are opportunities to do better, like Legend of the Five Rings. The Rokugan is the setting of the 3rd edition D&D Oriental Adventures book, and Rokugan and L5R have like vastly improved over time because the team behind it care deeply about trying to make sure that this world, this IP, is accessible to as many people as possible.
Totally. Well, that's something I want to ask about. It's something we talk a lot about on the podcast in general, just because we're history nerds, but it's history and just how much, if you're doing, early modern, I mean, the world looked very different and a lot less homogenized, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And so even just picking kind of a general era, and then if you're engaging at all with real history or a setting deeply inspired by a real place or a kind of real place, I mean, these get, sort of sketchy and sketchier, but there is that relationship to real world history. And one of the questions that I think naturally arises from like Grand Cathay, Oriental Adventures, Legend of Five Rings is like how much the designers, sort of researched or got right or cared, or things that they made fantastic in a good sense versus trying to sort of engage with history, but then creating Tsingtao, the beer village. And, I wonder how that's again, kind of how do you sort of view, I guess, history and culture and representation in your own work, which is a massive question, I know, but like,
huge.
Again,
Yeah.
maybe this can come back over the course of the thing, but if there's, something jumps to mind, but.
No, I think there's no matter what we do, no matter what we create, there will always, our experiences will always bleed into our creations, right? You enjoy something growing up, and it's going to be a part of your design. Like for me, I love D&D 3.5, and the things I design, the things I enjoy reflect that, right? I am, like a Chinese Canadian, and I purposefully include a lot of my culture and my experiences, in my work, whether intentionally or not. I started a whole podcast about Asian representation in games, because that's important to me. But I think, the one thing that I always tell people, whether I'm working as like a cultural consultant or, I'm working, somebody's just talking to me at a con, or I'm just hanging out on like a Discord server or something like that, is like when you start a project, it's really important to ask yourself why you're making certain decisions, right? Why you want to use this theme, why you want to represent a culture that's not yours. And one thing I will tell people is that I'm not here to police what you create. All I ask, and I think everybody asks, is that, you reflect on why you're creating something and if it can do harm to people. I think that's the answer that I will always give to a question like this, right? It's like, why?
Yeah, no, that's a really elegant, encapsulation, and I think touches on some of the other conversations we've had, but I think is really maybe one of the best put, response when we sort of think about, history and other cultures, and basically what are we simulating, right? Because it's so hard. I mean, honestly, from a very generous perspective, when you're designing games, you're choosing what to simulate. And so that why 100%, question is all about taking the, pausing and saying, what do I need this? Is, like you said, could this cause harm? Could this be misconstrued? Without being paranoid or not ever having fun with it, but just, you can have good ideas, lots of ideas. Maybe some of them you walk back, you do a little more research, you ask someone else.
Fun is a part of it. Like I like that you said that, because when we try to simulate things through games, we have to take liberties with certain things.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And that's why that why question is so important. Like my first game is called Ross Rifles. Do you folks know a lot about World War I and the Ross rifle?
I can't say I do.
So the Ross rifle is like a legendary Canadian rifle in that it performed so poorly in World War I. It is incredible.
That's such a
long range rifle. I know. It's an incredible long range rifle, but it's really long, so it's poorly suited for trench warfare. Mm-hmm. One of the deadliest soldiers of the war, Francis Pegamagabo, killed like almost 400 Germans using a Ross rifle. But it performed so badly on the battlefield that Canadian soldiers would wait for British soldiers to die to take their Lee Enfield rifles. But like we made a game called Ross Rifles. It literally celebrates this gun. But we chose to make a game that celebrates sort of Canadian perseverance. And, with like what's going on in the world right now, it seems like a very, very topical thing, like patriotism. Yeah. But yeah, it's about, Canadian perseverance and the stories told in the trenches. But we didn't, because we were trying to simulate World War I, we chose not to do things like simulate your gun jamming all the time, because that's not a part of the experience we were trying to emulate with the game.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same thing with any tabletop RPG, any board game. You have to take liberties in order to nail down a core experience.
Yeah. And it strikes me too, like, you want players to feel empowered, and you want them to feel like they have agency within the narrative that you're kind of spinning. And so, yeah, I think having deeply crunchy mechanics like, oh yeah, you got mud in the butt or in the muzzle of your rifle, and that, like it's just too far down the simulationist hole, and it takes away the joy of just playing in that space.
Yeah. And it's a question of like what the game is about, whatever's being simulated.
Right.
And because players are going to go on the loop of looking at the sheet and trying to do, it's that weird recursion of like, well, you told me, or I'm allowed to make up anything, but the things on my sheet say X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So if you have the mechanic where you can be really good at shooting or you can misfire a lot, the whole game's about shooting. If you have this PBTA game and it's more about relationships among each other and what is patriotism and what is resistance and what is fascism and what is it, what world do we want? It's a different game. And so I think that's always really interesting with especially with combat, which is so core to so many RPGs, is like, what thing about combat are you simulating? This goes back to the hit point discussion, whether we should
exactly
health or, you have wound states or something. But I think this should all lead into, obviously, because now and again, we can talk more about intermediary.
This is a great segue, by the way. This is a great segue.
You're working on a game that I believe has some lethal, it's literally the first 3 words, lethal wuxia melodrama. So, it sounds like there's some combat to be simulated, and probably, and this maybe is one way to frame it, is what's left out of Wandering Blades. How do you figure out what the game should be? And what should it not be, if that's not an unfair way to pose that?
No, this is something that I brought up. I forget which podcast I brought it up on, but there's like a term called the fruitful void in role playing games, and it essentially represents the space between the rules. Right. The idea is that your tabletop RPG is not only made up of the mechanics you design, but the parts of the play experience that aren't covered by the mechanics, but are still important to the experience, right? So in many games, like the Fruitful Void, is like romance. Like people might not explicitly design romance. For me, Wandering Blades, when I started designing it, I wanted to make a game that emulated the sort of classic wuxia cinema of like the 60s and 70s, like the Shaw Brothers movies, like the early John Woo films, the Tsui Hark films. And so I wanted to design a game about violence. And I wanted to leave space for people to interact with other parts of the genre in their own ways. And so for me, the things that I didn't design are like the drama mechanics, because everybody will sort of engage with that in their own way. But also wuxia media is so varied that I wanted to be, like, to use my advice earlier, really upfront about the experience that I am supporting with the mechanics that I've designed. And the experience that I'm supporting is highly lethal, tempo-based combat. And that's what I really like.
I love that. Yeah, that's a big part of the design for Dance Macabre, the game that I've been working on for a while as well. It's just like combat should be central in some ways, but also making it so lethal that it's also avoided most of the time. And that's
exactly what I'm doing with Wandering Blades.
Because you never explicitly say to avoid combat, but there's a deep implication that, like, if you get into combat, your character will probably suffer.
Yeah, opening spaces for punishment. So you could play it straight and it's monsters and heroes fighting, but you can also open up a space where you're very, very likely to die. And it feels more like that Walking Dead pressure to, okay, I need to escape combat, which is, to me, I always harken back to, as a kid, playing Call of Cthulhu and thinking is so much more fun than D&D because it was more lethal. And I think sometimes, you can have games that allow you to do both, or you try to ride that middle line where you're allowed to go in whatever direction your group, is going to find fun at that moment.
Yeah, like for me, I love the idea of characters being like very powerful and lethal at the start of the session. And when you engage in combat, you lose a bit of that lethality as you interact with the systems, like you do in a fight. Every little cut, every little exertion of yourself lessens the next possible, violent output that you have, right? And so you have to think very carefully about when you want to engage in violence. Also in Wandering Blades, you don't level up by killing things. It's all narrative. Because again, not everybody wants to have combat every single session. But when you do have combat, I want it to be meaningful, and I want there to be a reason why you did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like in real life, you don't level up by killing. You lose your sanity, and it's sad, So
exactly. I'm not going to go out and start grinding by just king bandits and getting
right. Killing bandits is such a weird especially. I mean, but even in the early modern, frankly, that was a particular job, and I think certain fiction. I'm sure there's equivalent texts across various traditions. I'm thinking of Blood Meridian. which is well into the modern. But the 19th century, capturing kind of guys who were killing bandits, i.e., like basically doing a genocide against Apache and other indigenous people, and it's like they're all insane, and they're just going more insane. And you're reading this book of these people going insane, and it really highlights that link between violence and losing something, violence and loss, or violence and a void. Whereas in D&D, as a kid at least, my experience of 2e and then 3 and 3.5 was violence was rewarded. And the more violence I did, the void was filled with gold and treasure and discovery. And it was kind of, it was fun. I mean, we're kids and it's still fun, but it doesn't seem at all now thinking about it, saying it out loud. It's like, wow, that's really unrealistic. Usually when you do violence, you're punished.
That's why people like the gold for XP experience, because you could obtain gold through violence, or you could obtain gold through wit. But both have the same sort of like end goal of cashing it in for XP.
Right. Well, also the gold for XP thing. It to me, it makes the game solely about the loot. Which is,
and that's a different experience in and of itself.
It's just personally less interesting to me, but I do see it as like a viable alternative to like, yes, you get experience for murder.
Yeah. Well, we kind of jumped in, but Daniel, I think it's probably more useful to you and more fair, and also for those listening who just aren't familiar yet, to step back and just say, what is Wandering Blades? How did you arrive at your new project? I first encountered it as a +1 XP physical zine that was cool, and I think Richard suggested I pick up, and I did, and I enjoyed it, and I thought, I should talk to Daniel. Seems like a good writer. It's an interesting setting, but yeah, I'd love to know sort of all about the project, and it's it's currently happening, right? So there's a couple points there, but I think maybe Origins can lead into the present, perhaps.
Yeah, Origins. It was 2 years ago, January of 2023. When Wizards decided to do the whole OGL thing. I had originally been writing like a Shinsha, so like a sort of like, I guess the equivalent of like high fantasy, a Shinsha campaign setting for 5e that I was using for my like home D&D game. And then the OGL thing happened, and I kind of found myself in like a place where I'm like, I don't know if I want to design a D&D thing anymore, and I want to try doing something different. And so I hard pivoted into wuxia, which is next to no magic / fantasy. It's almost like grounded fantasy. Chris and I were talking about this earlier. And so I started basically designing a game out of this sort of OGL drama that was happening in the industry. At around the same time, I had become deeply obsessed with this TCG called Flesh and Blood. Which I absolutely love. The thing I love most about it is how combat works. I love that the heroes that you play start off with all of their gear, their attacks, their armor, their weapons, and over time, you get weaker as your armor degrades or as you block. And there's this interesting decision making that happens during play where you have to decide whether or not you want to block but diminish your ability to return fire or clap back, or do you take the hit and hit back even harder? And I love how in this card game, you could capture tempo through overwhelming force or through, careful blocking or careful use of your equipment. And I loved how fast it was. I love how momentum was very much a key part of how the gameplay experience sort of like emerged. And I really wanted that on the tabletop. And so I started designing a wuxia game called Wandering Blades, because I really like the martial arts action genre, but where weapons are kind of central to the storytelling. Because I think that in addition to martial arts styles and techniques, weapons are a huge part of a character's identity. And I just think that they're cool. And so that's how Wandering Blades started. And so I kind of went down this rabbit hole of designing an RPG that essentially is a generator for action movies.
Yeah, so going for like very cinematic kind of action and
very cinematic, but also strategic. Mm-hmm. Because I think when a lot of people say cinematic, it means that there are no mechanics. But for me, I wanted something right in the middle. I wanted it to feel cinematic. I wanted it to be engaging. and I wanted it to feel natural. So if I'm attacking you, your instinct is, well, I want to block. And so that should be a mechanic in the game. And so combat in Wandering Blades is like player first. So players always go first, and they can go in whatever order they want. This allows people to like stay more engaged. I'm no longer sitting and waiting for my turn to roll my attack, to miss, and then to wait again. It's always like, well, can I combo off with you? Should we do this? How are we going to respond to what the enemy does? And it becomes this like very tactical dance of attack and defense. And so I landed on a system that emulated everything that I wanted out of a tabletop RPG. I've had playtests where the final encounter with the boss ends in 1 round. I had a session where it went 3 rounds, and it ended up with 1 player and 1 boss, and they both had 1 wound left. And it was a matter of who will land first.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And the player landed first and happened to get the kill, but they bled out. And it was like super cinematic in the way it like played out. And I absolutely loved the tension that it kind of like brought to the table, because it's like, who's going to go? It's almost like we're playing mind games in combat. Like, what's the GM going to do? Is Daniel going to save his reaction to block, or is he going to use it to attack twice? Sort of thing. Or, hey, let's wipe out most of these enemies, so Daniel has to put Daniel on the back foot. Right? So we're just constantly gaining this narrative and mechanical momentum against, your adversaries in battle.
Yeah, I mean,
I really want the story to meet the combat mechanics.
Right, and that's to me is what makes a good. I love action movies, and I grew up I love all the old martial arts movies in general. I mean, I think Golden Harvest was our way in, but I mean, certainly then I ended up seeing a lot of stuff that by the Shaws and others. But it's like, I think so much of that is about stakes and about making things, no matter how by modern CGI standards hokey looking, feel very real, because basically, like you said, there's some interesting scenario. Just what you said, you kind of lean in. There's 2 guys, they each are about to die. Only one of them is going to live. Only one of them can kind of walk away and bandage their wounds. Who will strike first, and who are we rooting for? And I think those are moments that a lot of us see. And then I think naively, and I mean, I'm curious with your experience, again, as a very experienced GM and working with kids and all that, like, you kind of know how you want it to go out as a player. And sometimes, especially when you're younger, it's like the mechanics fight that, or they get in the way. And I think as a game designer, some of us who really do enjoy, I don't myself actually do martial arts. I'd get beaten up pretty easily, but so don't come at me. But I enjoy playing games with fighting, because there's a lot of stakes. It's really good for story, I feel, and it's fun. Genre fiction's fun. Action movies are fun. Yeah. But it's like, how do you as a designer design systems that don't get in your own way? So I heard you already said some of these things. You wanted to have blocking, all these mechanics. The kind of winding down is actually getting harder, not easier, because your body's tireder. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm just kind of riffing on like, how did you kind of bring action movies into the world of game design, and how did you, respond to D&D and being very expert in sort of the D20 world, and say, what did you sort of pick and choose? We were talking about the OSR.
Yeah.
Is this OSR or not OSR?
I think it's OSR because I want it to be OSR.
Yeah,
to be honest.
I like that answer.
Fair enough.
I think it's OSR in that it's high lethality. I think it's OSR because it's a toolbox experience. I think it's OSR because you're supposed to seek solutions outside of your character sheet. Mm-hmm. But I also think that's where it's also story game, right? And I think that's also where it's a little trad, because you are enabled to be strong in combat, unlike many OSR games. For me, the exercise that worked really well in designing this combat mechanic is actually watching movies and playing video games. At the very start, I wanted to decide on like my design pillars, like what I wanted Wandering Blades to be. And it's many of the things that I already said, right? I wanted it to be dangerous. I wanted it to embody old school principles, like, again, emergent narrative and like sort of challenging open-ended storytelling. I wanted a toolbox experience, but I also wanted combat to involve skill. I wanted to reward system mastery, but I also, and Tony from Plus One really loved this when I pitched Wandering Blades to him, I wanted to have a fast time to violence. I wanted, like, almost like in sales, time to value. I wanted to have a fast time to violence. So I wanted there to be a fast onboarding to the combat system. So I wanted people to be able to, in very little time, engage in really compelling and beautiful violence on the tabletop. And so when I had these sort of like key pillars or design principles in mind, I started working on like the flow of combat. What do I want the players to be able to do? And as I started drafting out the system, I would watch movies and gameplay from video games that I wanted to emulate to see if the system would do it. And one of the video games that was a huge influence was actually not a wuxia video game, but like sort of like a Japanese sort of like historical fiction game, Ghost of Tsushima.
Oh, love Ghost of Tsushima. It's a great game.
And so I would play Ghost of Tsushima, or I would watch high level gameplay because it's better than me. And I would watch frame by frame if my system could emulate that. So Wandering Blades has stances, just like that game. There is like a particular flow to combat there where you need to kind of be, fast and push the pace. And so I would watch movies and I would watch video game gameplay to kind of capture what it is I actually wanted out of those and how I could replicate them consistently in a tabletop environment. And then I landed on the mechanics for Wandering Blades.
Enjoying the show? Please consider supporting Why We Roll in all of our games over at patreon.com/Stillfleet. Dear patrons, we really love y'all. We just couldn't keep making Why We Roll without your support. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Now back to the show.
I tried to do a playthrough of Ghost of Tsushima with the one-hit kill mode. Have you ever tried that?
It's so hard.
Well, but it also, like, it's fascinating because it does simulate, I think, a lot of the same things that you're trying to get to with Wandering Blades and for me with Dance Macabre, where it's like, yeah, combat is fucking terrifying. It is terrifying. Yeah. Like, to know that, like, one sword stroke and you're game over, like, it puts this real pressure on you to either perform really well in combat or just to avoid it altogether, which is what I ended up doing. It's just like, how can I do everything without fighting every single person I come across?
Yeah, or how can I get through a fight fast so I don't expend all of my resources?
Right. Yeah, or how can I define a fight differently? Like Vex is getting at in the chat, but also it's been my experience GMing and getting better over time with GMing, where it's like long dragged out fights where you have to kill all of the goblins or whatever, the bandits.
Yeah, can I just kill the leader?
Yeah.
or like, can I not be a psycho? Like, do I need to kill all these people, or can I defeat them and be like, okay, are you guys gonna like fuck off? And then they're like, okay, I don't want to die, because in real life, most people, if you like knock, you basically beat them up and you have them at gunpoint or sword point, like, what's the likelihood they're like, no, I'm chaotic evil, I will fight to the death? Like, that's just so silly. And I think there's so many other opportunities to kind of take that basic insight and turn it into like, okay, does something interesting in the environment change or the story change where both sides sort of stop? And I find that a lot with Stillfleet, where it's a fun kind of way to pull the rug out from players who do want what I associate more with other dark sci-fi games is like, we're going to fight all these aliens to the death. And it's like, no, in real life, the aliens are very smart. Like they like pretty quickly get the gist and they're like, okay, let's do something else here. And they leave, they make a deal, they change the environment. There's like spookiness and violence is real and it's a threat, but you're not grinding against kind of set piece battles. And I feel like there's something about good action movies that are constantly evolving, and there's a dynamicism to them. Even like very fighty ones, high body count, John Wick, there's kind of a constant, well, I need to go over here now, I need to go over here. There's kind of goals and movement. And I think any system that makes players stop and think about it and not just kind of grind through because they need XP. It's a basic insight for this, audience, but
totally.
It sounds fun. I want to play it.
It does sound fun. We have a question in the chat from our good friend Taylor, who is asking, Daniel, what were some of your key film references? What was appealing about them to you outside of video games?
How much time do we have?
As much time as you want.
Yeah. So there were like a couple. Not all of them are wuxia. I'll start with the wuxia ones and then I'll go into the non-wuxia ones. First was a movie called Shadow. Shadow came out in 2018. And it is probably one of the artsiest modern wuxia movies. It features like a whole faction of characters who use umbrellas that are made of blades, and they like could like shoot them at people. Oh, it's incredible.
That's sick as hell.
That's cool.
It's really
so
cool.
good.
It's also, and my recommendations are all going to be accessible films, whether legally or not. So Shadow, really, really cool wuxia movie. Another one was called Come Drink With Me. Come Drink With Me came out in the late 60s, I think in like 66. And it was one of the most influential wuxia movies of all time, and it was like the pinnacle of the way in which they were shooting and telling wuxia stories at the time, which featured sort of like women as protagonists, fighting against like sort of like patriarchy and like oppressive governments and stuff like that. So Come Drink With Me, and then another film called Dragon Inn, which was also by King Hu, the director, that also came out at that time. Were all really influential on me. I really liked how these were wuxia movies that were made on like shoestring budgets. Violence was like core to them, but every single fight had a purpose, either in, you know, portraying a character a certain way or establishing a threat for later on in the story. Really, really important movies for me there. Another one was a film by my favorite director of all time, John Woo. I love like Hard Boiled is my favorite movie.
Hard Boiled is so good.
And I love John Woo so much. I started a new podcast actually called John Who, and we're watching all of my co-host has never watched a John Woo movie, so we're going one movie at a time.
Oh, that's great.
And one of John Woo's early movies, and it served as a prototype for his heroic bloodshed films, was called Last Hurrah for Chivalry. And if you watch Last Hurrah for Chivalry, it is basically Wandering Blades the movie. Last Hurrah for Chivalry is notably at the time of recording, one of John Woo's only movies to get a Blu-ray Criterion release.
Interesting.
Huh. Not Hard Boiled, or not? I mean,
Hard Boiled only has a DVD Criterion release, and it's out of print.
Interesting.
The lesser of the discs.
There are other. Well, he doesn't actually own the rights to his films.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he didn't own the rights to his films for a really long time. A construction company owned them, and they kind of like sat. That's why there are so many different DVD releases for his movies, because nobody was enforcing the IP.
Interesting.
But now a studio called Shout bought out his filmography, and they're going to be releasing everything now again, digitally restored. So that's why I say now. There are other movies like Hand of Death, which is a John Woo movie that he worked on with Jackie Chan. That got like a Blu-ray release, but it's not a Criterion restoration. But yeah, so Last Hurrah for Chivalry, that came out in the late 70s. Really, really important movie for me because it really captured a lot of, not particularly well, but it was John Woo's way of exploring themes of like brotherhood and loyalty. And by brotherhood, I mean brotherhood of like the blade, and how violence is inescapable for many of these people. So I loved Last Hurrah for Chivalry. Hero obviously is like a huge wuxia movie, and the fight between like, you know, Jet Li and Donnie Yen is kind of legendary.
Yeah, it is.
And that pacing and that back and forth is what I wanted to emulate as well with Wandering Blades. I think that movie also did a really cool job of using weapons as a way of framing a character's personality.
Yeah, that's something I can't remember, Daniel, if we were talking about this shortly before recording or if it's come up in the course of recording, because my mind is mush. But yeah, I think something that you said earlier was that you wanted to focus on weapons, and it seems to me that like, yeah, the weapon that a character chooses in a wuxia film or that they're using defines so much of who they are.
Well, if wuxia is a genre, one of the things, like, I mean, there are differences between a wuxia movie and like a martial arts movie, right? In wuxia movies, the characters are typically people who are like wanderers. They have like their own code of chivalry, but they're often portrayed as like swordsmen or weapon users.
Right.
So weapons are a core part of the genre itself.
Yeah, and I think there's parallels, and they're all culturally distinct. But I mean, there's parallels to the picaresque tradition in Spain and France, and then broadly Western Europe that informs ultimately, D&D.
Yeah,
and that I talk a lot about just because I was reading those books, saying, "Oh, these are actually really rad. They're actually better than I think a lot of novels today. Books from the 1700s about guys in the 1500s, or it's always like looking back a little bit, but it's about people displaced by what we now say capitalism, colonialism, people who were soldiers who left these horrible colonial armies." And became brigands. They became the bad guys, but they're the bad guys from the point of view of sensibility, rich assholes, right? So they're kind of the good guys to us. Like they're vaguely on the left. And I think maybe there's some parallels there. And then I also think of like, there's filmic traditions, and again, it's different. And Japan was a colonial power, but like, kind of movies about Ronin, right? And like people again who are part of the military caste, and they're kicked out for whatever reason, and they fall, and there's that kind of idea of like who has the ability to move, which often travels restricted, right, in these settings, who has weapons training, and who has some sort of, and this is where I think the filmic part is really interesting, who is just like destined to die, like who is kind of driven towards some like revenge or some dark destiny. And I think that kind of mode of almost like melodrama is really important to some of these movies. And is a little bit not in classic Dragon game to me. Like, I don't think the instructions to be like an Elven Ranger, they don't come with that tinge of like, your Elven Ranger is definitely going to fucking die. Like, it's like, explore the world, do anything. You're a superhero. It's more like
you
Marvel.
live forever. You're immortal. Yeah. I think one last movie, one that I love, so much that I actually rewatched it with some friends 2 days ago. Is actually a remake of the Dragon Inn, the one I mentioned. There's a remake starring young Donnie Yen as a corrupt eunuch, but it is extremely good. There's a scene where a character gets the flesh and everything stripped from their hands so that they're just a skeleton, and they impale someone with their bones. It's awesome. It's a vibe, but I love Dragon Inn, and then the 1992 remake, New Dragon Gate.
Nice. See, that was Fede Alvarez missed a perfect opportunity in Alien Romulus to stab the xenomorph with the bone hand. I don't know if you've seen that, Daniel.
I love that. So my partner and I have been we watched Alien Romulus, and then we went on a Predator binge.
Oh, nice.
Watching everything Predator. I love Predator.
Another character defined by their choice of weaponry.
Their choice of weaponry and their code, and they're also their code.
Yeah.
Also, I will say this. I was talking about this with some friends. John Wick is a really good wuxia movie.
I agree.
It's just wuxia with guns.
Yeah.
Because not only is it all about the weaponry, but it's about their codes of honor, the Brotherhood of Assassins.
Yeah.
The world of assassins exists parallel to the world of law enforcement and the sort of the regular people, right? Because you never see like really the police and stuff in John Wick movies, right? And that's very much like wuxia, right? Like a core part of wuxia is the sort of community of martial artists. It's like when a character's walking around and be like, "Oh, I recognize your style," like that is a part of the experience, and it's very much the same with John Wick. It's like everybody knows John. Everybody knows that you don't. There's no business on continental grounds. They have their own currency, like these coins that make no sense.
Yeah, they make no sense.
They make no sense because they're symbols.
Right.
Because they're symbols. It's like, one coin is one stay at the hotel, but also one coin is to get rid of a dead body, and 3 coins gets me this new handgun.
Well, they're also video games brought to life. I mean, we're talking about translating film and video game into RPGs.
Yeah.
I mean, I think John Wick is translating violent video games into actually, like you said, a really well-made movie that does some of those things. It has the melodrama, it has the built-in revenge. It has all that feeling.
But the social environment of the assassins is very much like the social environment of the martial artists and the underworld and the outlaws.
Yeah, you're saying all the things. I was thinking as you're saying that, like this, it's like sicarios and like fiction, this American obsession with like narco-trafficante like world, which is often very cloistered. And there's kind of two strains. There's the kind of realist strain, which I don't think is like wuxia, but then there are movies and properties, and even before, think of like ridiculous things like Way of the Gun, or we were talking about on Left of the Projector, Equilibrium.
Yeah, Equilibrium.
Oh man, Equilibrium.
There's that idea of like this cloistered community of assassins, and in all these movies, and especially John Wick more than any, because it's so good and so ridiculous. It's like if you did the math, you're like, wow, 1 out of every 10 people is a professional assassin. How is anyone on Earth alive? Like literally.
Because they have these, but they have these codes of honor, right?
Sure, exactly, and that's it. That it's not random violence. It's fantasy in the sense that everyone's an assassin, but there's also fantasy systems and codes of honor and all that. So,
yeah, that's why again, John Wick is a wuxia movie with guns.
Yeah. I would go so far as to say that John Wick succeeded where Equilibrium failed.
Yes, yeah, I think that's
right.
They were trying to be a wuxia film, but also like kind of weird right-wing Big Brother, weirdly coded. Anyway, whatever. Listen,
they were trying this whole like panopticon, like they wanted you to like suppress your emotions, and this is what happens when you feel, and no art. They were trying too much.
They were.
There's a lot going on. So back to Wandering Blades. I think maybe it'd be interesting to hear a little, just because we're going to run out of time. But Daniel, I want to make sure people get a sense of like how the game plays. So we've talked a little about combat, but what are who are the characters? You're kind of leading into this with their wanderers, and they have trained some sort of weapons training. That they're capable of doing things. But one thing that stood out to me is there's not many sort of classes. I mean, it's sort of low fantasy in that sense. Like you said,
there's only 3 classes.
There's 3 classes. So can you tell us a little about sort of the play loop from the sort of player perspective?
Yeah, one thing that I think is really important is that like the way that the classes play out in Wandering Blades is like my sort of like Chinese diaspora interpretation of wuxia media, right? Like somebody in China who consumes wuxia media there and is born and raised in China is going to look at this very differently. But for me, there are 3 classes. One is the Yosha, which is like the knight errant, right? You're like the classic wandering hero, and you protect the innocent, and you're the character that walks into town, and when you see a corrupt noble, you're going to step in and stop them from stomping on some like kid who stole bread, like that kind of character. There's the outlaw, so the outlaw could be the notorious assassin, or the bandit lord, or the black market merchant, or the thief. And then there's the scholar, and the scholar gets a vocation, so they're either like a detective, which is a trope within wuxia, or they're a physician. And what I wanted to do was also, like, I should step back one moment and say, early in the design process, I wanted to be really clear with myself about how long I wanted people to play a character for. If you're going to make like, somebody asked me this on a podcast, and they asked like, why didn't you make, or I think somebody asked me this on the Kickstarter in a comment or something. It was a very thoughtful comment, but they asked, why are there only 5 levels for each character, and why don't you want to support long-term play? And I essentially said, because I was inspired by a lot of these films, I wanted people to play one-shots or maybe a couple of sessions in total. But also because if you're playing a game that is highly lethal, you may never reach level 20.
Yeah.
And so having fewer levels sets the expectation that these characters, at least the stories in which we tell about them on the table, they're fleeting, right? And this, again, interfaces with the mechanics, the high lethality and everything like that.
Yeah. And just real quickly, it's kind of the difference between prestige TV and a good movie, where a movie ends. I mean, a good movie can be 3 hours long, but it's usually kind of better if it's 2 hours long, an hour and a half. Prestige TV can go on and on. So it's somewhat just that experience too, how much you want characters to feel like they're living out an epic that has a, parabolic, goes up and goes down, versus the elf that gets to be level 20 and kill God.
Yeah. That's not what this is, right? This could be like, hey, we're going to play out an action movie, or we're going to have 2 really good seasons of Andor.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's kind of how I see it. And so with these classes, I wanted to have a lot of build variety. So you could play a game where all 5 or 6 players are all the same class. They're all the Yosha, but every single one comes from a different martial arts temple, like a different school, a different sect. and they all play differently in combat. They all have different signature weapons. Or you could all be outlaws. One person could literally be an assassin. One person could be a bandit. One person could be a thief. You could have a party that has two scholars. One person is literally a detective, and you're here to solve crimes and support your team. And another could be a physician who kills people with pressure point strikes.
That's so good.
But even though there are 3 classes, there is like an immense amount of build variety. And because the game has a short sort of like, not a product lifespan, but your story doesn't go indefinitely, I want to encourage you to go back to these classes and try to build something different, but also look beyond what the class features are or what's on the class table. It's why in the game, the first thing you do is actually create a name for your character. It was pointed out to me that this is very odd. I was on a podcast and they said, it was really odd that we started by making a character name. And I had never thought about it, but like after reflecting, to me, it's so important to pick a character name, especially within this genre, because your name reflects everything about you.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not just a name, right? It's an epithet. It's
and that helps you narratively think about like, what are my character's drives? What's my keepsake? Who am I connected to? What is my backstory? And then how can I use the mechanics of this class to then flesh out this idea that I have of my character, not the other way around.
Yeah.
It also is interesting thinking about those great moments when there's movie studios producing groups of films that are similar with a stable of actors, but each is distinct. And there's different, so you can imagine the directors as GMs. Let's say you have 5 friends and they trade off GMing and there's roughly 20 people playing who are the actors. But every time they're going to play through an arc, whether it's 1 session or 5 sessions, they're being a different character and they're able to rotate through and sort of see different sides of the world. But it's not meant to be one-to-one or it's in the same extended universe. It's not that Marvel idea that's that hard linkage. It's a much softer way of just saying, look, this is a genre we're all interested in, we're exploring it, and we're kind of building it together. And I think you have seen that in the history of film, and people talk about, everything from, I don't know, spaghetti westerns to, again, we're talking about certain studios that made really cool epic martial arts movies. But I think that's a cool, different approach as opposed to either you have to play a campaign and it's always the same character, or it's just a one-shot. And it's like we're going to play different games every week. It's like, let's play through different aspects of the same game in the same world.
Yeah.
And let ourselves.
And here's the thing, like just because there are 5 levels doesn't mean it's only 5 sessions.
Right. I mean, that's something that I was going to say is that, I mean, Wandering Blades just doesn't strike me as a game that is about leveling in the same way that sometimes D&D can feel like it's about getting to the next level, and if you don't gain a level at the end of a session you feel disappointed, but like Wandering Blades, it feels more about like exploring your character, exploring the fiction, and if narratively you're going to get a level every couple of sessions, that's cool, but it's not really about that.
And that's why there are mechanics in the core book that actually prevent you from leveling up in a way. So in this game, when you level up, where you gain XP at the end of a session, through like a conversation that you have at the table. One of the things that you do at the end of every session is you kind of ask yourself like a series of questions. Is it like, did I participate? Did I, engage with a particular aspect of my character? Like, did I accomplish a noteworthy deed? Or like, did I do something meaningful related to my character's drive? Or did I experience a tough setback or obstacle? Or did I have an impactful scene with my connection? And every time you say yes, you get an XP. And when you have 5 experience, you level up. But there are also systems within the game, such as martial arts manuals, which are a huge part of like the genre. But martial arts manuals require you to spend XP to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to use your XP to level up your character, or do you want to use some of your XP to learn a really new powerful secret technique? And so you could have somebody at the table who is 1 level lower than everybody, but has a really powerful technique.
Yeah.
And so that's why leveling isn't actually super important, because it is not core to, like, gaining the level is not what's actually important. It's how you gained it through the storytelling.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And I love having different pathways for like what advancement looks like. Not even talking about leveling, but like, how do you advance your character? How do you advance their story? That's very powerful.
It feels a little similar, but different to like PBTA or something, where you're
Right.
marking, experience, and you unlock moves, and it's meant to kind of be
Yeah.
history and can change around, but it still has some of that, tying it to like, getting a cool secret fighting technique just sounds cool. It sounds fun for one. It's something I immediately want to do, right? And you can just imagine that actual, exogenous joy of someone feeling like it's almost more like the old school leveling up when you're a kid and you first level up your D&D character. Whereas now that's become kind of rote. And if you've played a lot of these games, you're like, yeah, whatever. I just want to try, I don't care about that as much. Unlocking a secret technique is like a fun way to kind of have different reward scenarios.
Or like, imagine if, in one session you find this martial arts manual and you're holding on to it, and now you're like, when do I learn it? When do I do this thing?
Right.
When do I dedicate, and this is something I'm working on right now, when do I dedicate my downtime?
Yeah.
Right.
Because like wuxia is like, you can talk about OSR games, there is no gold for XP like loop in this game, because that's just not what you do in wuxia. Right? It's not about dungeon crawling. It's not about getting treasure and amassing wealth. Right? Characters can be motivated by financial gain, but it's not really what the genre is about. And so it didn't make sense for there to be this loop of gold for XP. And that's where like the story game kind of comes into play. Mm-hmm. It's like you role play for XP in a structured way. And you hold yourself accountable to it by talking about it at the end of the session.
Which is great. And by having it be about humans, even if you introduce supernatural elements, you're making the story solidly about people having to interact in a social environment with other people and make choices about that world and what is right or proper, and how are they treated and how should they treat others, even if they're treated badly as outcasts. As you said, maybe I still want to save the orphan from being beaten by the bad baron or whatever. And I think that's an interesting way to sort of, have a gameplay loop that at once is about violence and cycles of violence, but another way it's about, reckoning with your social world. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really cool. And I think, again, going back to that core, like we kind of have been circling around, how do you design games about violence that aren't just grindy or boring? Sounds like, you've kind of achieved it. And it sounds like, again, Chris, I keep thinking this would be another fun one to do, like, play for 30 minutes, right? Like do a scene, Daniel,
absolutely,
learn how it works. So maybe
here's what we do after the Kickstarter is over. The three of us will play a game.
Let's do it.
We don't have to do it for content. We don't have to do it for content. We just play a game.
We don't have to do it for content? What do you... What?
Yeah, we don't have to do it. It doesn't have to be content. But I would love to run a game for you.
Yeah, that'd be so fun. I would love that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But yeah, after the Kickstarter, you should get some rest first.
Yeah, after the Kickstarter. I am, unfortunately, now that we're funded, I'm like, okay, we're still pushing. But now I'm thinking, what next? What do I want to do after this?
Well, speaking of which, there's a Kickstarter.
Oh, God. Yes, yeah, there is a Kickstarter.
Importantly.
So before we let you go, I guess let's do at least one more. Let's do Kickstarter, maybe, real quickly, or, what can people get? Like, what are some exciting things? Again, less like selling a product and more like, I'm curious, as we've created these, you've created games. What are some fun things that this enables you to do, or fun things you've discovered in the product design process, if that makes sense, separately from the game design process? Like what's bringing it to life now? It's different than the zine. It's different than a quick start.
Yeah, it's just so expanded rules. Like, with this Kickstarter comes like expanded rules for like the core rule books. You can get a physical book. You can get a PDF. We're actually doing acrylic standees for all of like the classes and stuff, because there aren't wuxia miniatures out there. And so, we're doing acrylic standees, we're doing like, art cards. We just hit our first stretch goal, which means that we're going to get 2 zines, both digital. One zine is a collection of essays about the wuxia genre. So I've got a bunch of different guest writers who are writing about different concepts that you see within wuxia, but also like influential wuxia films. I have a bunch of stretch goal writers who are actually going to be contributing things that are interpretations of the sort of genre and the system. So there are going to be 2 new classes. First one is actually being designed by Monkau. So if you're an OSR sort of enthusiast, you would know Monkau. Like Reach of the Roach God, Thousand Islands, stuff like that. Very talented creator who is actually going to introduce a class inspired by the Kunlun, which in wuxia media and like sort of fiction, and then in historical China was a term used to describe like dark-skinned Chinese people, but also foreigners with dark skin, and notably from like Southeast Asia, who were brought into China. And there was like a famous story called Kunlun Nu about a dark-skinned vassal who helped save his retainer's wife. But it's a wuxia story, and so I think this is an opportunity to basically have underrepresented cultures sort of like have their own place here.
Yeah.
So our first stretch goal, we're going to get a fourth class. And then my friend Hiromi Koda, who is going to actually make a class that inspired by the Ryukyu Kingdom in Okinawa.
Oh, very cool.
Because, during the Ming Dynasty, they were actually a tributary state. So there's this cool overlap between the two. So to me, it makes perfect sense to have some sort of class from, again, another part of Asia that is really underrepresented. Mm-hmm. Like we see a lot of samurai stuff, but is there anything about Okinawa?
Yeah, you don't see a lot about Okinawa, and that opens up so many interesting narrative possibilities around like peasant resistance and
exactly,
so
which
cool.
is very much about like wuxia, and so like I want this supplement to be an opportunity to kind of show people how they can engage with this. So like I have another contributor, Jonathan Mendoza, who there's this movie that I really love. It's the best action movie that came out last year. It's called Twilight of the Warriors Walden. And the pitch gets everybody every single time. I've never had somebody be like, nah, that's not for me. It's a wuxia movie set in the 80s in the Kowloon walled city.
Oh, done. I'm in.
You see,
100%
every single time.
Let's fucking go.
So like you have like 1980s Hong Kong fashion. You got guys with mullets and mustaches, swords, pipes, AKs, fighting in the close quarters of the Kowloon city, but also doing wire fu.
Nice.
It's incredible.
That's amazing. I've actually like in my heart of hearts wanted to play a game set in Kowloon Walled City for such a long time. That is very exciting to me.
And Twilight of the Warriors Walden is a wuxia movie set there. So Jonathan is going to be actually helping me design firearm rules and an entire sect for the Yosha dedicated to gun fu.
That's awesome.
And then we have another freelancer named Ruvaid Verk who's one of the designers of the Stormlight RPG. And Ruvaid kind of pitched to me the idea of bringing in an additional sect for the Yosha inspired by Kalari Payatu, which is an Indian martial art. It's actually the oldest surviving martial art. And I think some scholars suggest that it's actually the progenitor of like Shaolin Kung Fu.
Interesting.
And so the idea here is because there are so many connections between India and China, why not have a sect enabling people to play as a character from South Asia with weapons from the region too?
Yeah, that's amazing.
And so we have a ton of other stuff, additional adversaries, weapons, items coming to this stretch goal. And we're on our way to our next stretch goal, which is additional art by the artist Lee, who is super talented.
Nice. Well, I mean, people should definitely back the Kickstarter. Hopefully we'll get this out pretty soon. We have a couple weeks. Let me double check.
We've got a couple of weeks, 16 days left. So final
okay. So as the time of this taping, 16 days.
Yes.
And you'll probably take orders after the fact, right? So people can probably still pick it up.
Totally. I hope so.
Awesome.
Let's say so.
Okay. Well, I think we should wrap it there. I do have one more spicy question, but I'm worried it'll take us too long. But I just was thinking through, like, one of our early interviews was with Mark Diaz Truman from Magpie Games, and a game that I really like, but is still sort of in development, called Cartel, which is again about
Cartel's cool.
Like okay, well, what if you are a narco or you're a La Rata or you're a DA agent, and like using this PBTA narrative mechanic, how does that like function as a campaign? And we had an interesting moment where he was like, I don't think a lot of people want to play. They don't want to play outside of their own ethnic experience. Right. And that's like a barrier.
Yeah.
So this is, again, I think this is cool and I want to play Wandering Blades, but is that how have you thought of that as a designer? And is that in your playtest experience, something you've had to overcome where people say, well, because it feels set in China, I'm not allowed, or like, what do I need to know? So either, take it how you want. Like, are there sort of tools or ways in that the game, offers players to encourage them to sort of participate and learn about wuxia and just more broadly, stuff in the game that you're interested in?
That's why I think wuxia is the perfect genre for this, because if you watch a lot of the films that I've mentioned, are set in historical China, but the time period in which they're set is very ambiguous. The location, where they are, it's all set dressing for the character drama, which takes a lot of the pressure off of it for players. You don't need to have a detailed ancient Chinese campaign setting. In fact, the core rulebook, the adventures are all set in. I kind of like the idea of like a bottle episode or like a one location film.
Totally.
There is literally one, and it's just a roadhouse in the border province of China. And it's got everything you need, all the different factions, all the different events that could happen in this roadhouse. And you could tell basically endless stories in one location.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me a lot too of, obviously different genre, but some similarities. Just a lot of samurai fiction and samurai movies. Like I'm thinking of Seven Samurai, where it is a bottle episode. If you really think about it that way, it's
one village.
It's like very discrete location. And yeah, you can kind of hand wave the things around it because, like you're saying, it's about the character drama in that discrete location.
Yeah. And this is, I was just talking with our friends at Dungeons and Drama Nerds, but it makes me think of this, like, it's coming from theater too. When I think, like, I know, when I think of the great, like, Gambare, like, Chambara, like action movies from Japan, they're coming out of people building theater sets. And they're either, even no matter how big you build it, it's still going to be at most the size of a small village. So it always is going to have a little bit of a claustrophobic, weird scale kind of effect, even if they're very realistic in one sense. There's kind of a way in which your brain, there's that uncanny valley where like we know it's a movie. And I think the Westerns, there's a lot of movies from that era.
Yeah, Westerns.
And I imagine wuxia has some
Westerns
of that too,
totally.
Where that's like it's realistic up to a point, but then your brain also kind of knows, it's kind of blurry, and in quotations, it's kind of like there's a fantasy edge.
There are going to be like historical anachronisms.
Right.
And on top of that, there are, I anticipated this. And there are also going to be, like, I've also written in supports into the game. Like, there's an entire section on, like, how to name your character. Mm-hmm. Like, here are some tables that you can roll for Chinese names if you want to. Or here's an entire primer on just using nicknames and why nicknames are totally okay, right, in the genre. And here are some examples. Like, one of them, like I said, one of the most influential movies of all time, Come Drink With Me, the main character, her name is just Golden Swallow. That's your character name. And it takes a lot of pressure off of, having to perform as a Chinese person. Right. And then, there are guidelines on how to name your characters, but also an entire section on like best practices, how to, run Wandering Blades. What are themes that you can explore with wuxia? And I've put like unexhausted, like a long list of inspirations, all the different movies, all the different games that inspired this. So if you want to go in and look for something, there's a lot that you can find.
I knew you'd have thought through this.
I am a big fan of appendix ends. Just as again, just having context for what you're looking at and being able to explore the genre on your own without having.
I'm not here to police your game and to be like, oh, that's inaccurate. That's the nature of tabletop RPGs, right? People are going to play the game the way they want to play it because it lacks structure like a video game.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, as long as I do what I can to not enable people to do harm, that's all I can really do as a designer.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I need to make sure that people are enabled to try to learn and do the right thing. At the same time.
Yeah. Giving people the tools.
It's education and plausible deniability.
Right.
Perfect mixture.
And that's art. In general, that's movies, right? Again, we're just saying they're not really, unless you're whatever can burn. Unless you're doing a documentary, it's not real. And like fiction, when you read novels, it is that trick of like, on the one hand, oh, it's just a story. But on the other hand, you are getting in someone's perspective. The author, at least, was alive in a certain place and time. And what if they were somewhere else on Earth and they lived 100 years ago? You're going to be experiencing pieces of that, regardless of kind of how fictional, their work is. And so I think games have a little bit of a quality, like you're saying, it's a little bit of a trick, and it's a little bit of a, protecting yourself as a creator, but also you do want to educate people, lead them in. And at the end of the day, I really like how you said it. It's just, hey, am I doing harm, or is this good fun? And I feel like most of us, you can kind of tell the difference, right? If you're not like a crazy person. So
totally.
That was, I really appreciate, Daniel, all your advice and spending time with us.
Very much so.
Chris, do you want to take the final question?
Oh my God, I would love to. Daniel, where can folks find you? How can folks support you? And where do you live on the internet?
Right now, I live on Blue Sky. So you can find me on Blue Sky at Daniel H. Kwan, Daniel H. Kwan. You can find Wandering Blades at wanderingblades.com. That's where you can back the Kickstarter. Very excited. We're going to be launching a Discord server soon.
Nice.
Discord makes me very nervous because, it's a lot. But we're going to be launching a Wandering Blades Kickstarter very, very soon. But yeah, back the project. And if you can't, I totally understand. But spread the word. But if you're an action movie enthusiast, if you like what I've kind of been putting out, I can promise that Wandering Blades is very much the game I've been saying it is. Yeah.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Daniel Kwan. Thanks for joining us. This has been just an absolute pleasure talking with you tonight. Mm-hmm. And thank you, Wythe, as always, for being here. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to us ramble and have fun. I hope you had fun too. And
and real quick,
I thought you were going to say, Chris, I thought you were saying, and thank me for being here too. I thought you were going to thank yourself.
And thank me for editing this podcast in probably a week or so. Thanks for listening to Why We Roll.
Our theme music is by the brilliant Sam Tyndall and Arpline.
If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You can find us on all social media at Stillfleet. You can find out more about Danse Macabre, Stillfleet, and all of our games over at stillfleet.com.
Hey there, I'm Hugh from Moderation. If you like today's episode, why not check out The Next Session, your D&D agony aunts there to answer all of your questions. Join Adam and Alyssa as they answer questions sent in by listeners like you about how to solve the problems that come with running and playing in all sorts of different tabletop scenarios. Available wherever you get your podcasts.